and welcome to the first ever online gratitude gathering hosted by myself, Noah Gabriel Press McIntyre, and my mom, Nancy Miriam Hawley. And welcome to our esteemed guest, Anna Soter, who's also my faculty mentor for the Self-Design Graduate Institute's self-directed course of study, which this is the culmination of a course of study that's been going on since late April, early May, and we'll share more about that. But before we begin, I just wanted to get your permission, Anna and Miriam, to be recording this session and be making it available to some of my close loved ones, as well as for our analysis for the purposes of the course. Thank you.
You have my permission.
Thank you so much, and I give permission as well.
To record yourself. Good.
And I want to take a moment to just allow, give permission as well to really allow ourselves to be guided by our intuition and our inner wisdom during this time together. We'll be together for approximately an hour, and maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more, depending on how the spirit moves us. But the first thing that I feel very called to do or invoke is to invite the ancestors into the space, into this virtual room. And so that's something that we can do silently, and there may be some people who want to mention who's kind of not here on video, but maybe you want them to be here with us kind of in spirit. So I definitely want to take a moment to include my father, who I'll be introducing a little bit more about his life and his work. But this is a picture of my dad and I.
Great, thank you.
This is him in hospice. It's very important to know that this is during a time when I started writing a lot of poetry, and the course that we designed together, My Gratitude Myself, was very much inspired by a poem, which is in this card that I made for my mom, and I'll be sharing that poem in just a moment. So I just wanted to bring his presence into the space and his love and kind of his sense of equanimity to us tonight. I also want to take a moment to call upon my grandparents, my grandfather Robert McIntyre and Ada McIntyre, my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side, and also my grandmother Helene Press, who was one of the most encouraging academic scholars that I've ever met. She was reading great literary works until 3 weeks before she passed away at 98 years old. And my grandfather, mom's father and mother, Helene and Abe Press, who was quite the mensch, and my ability to make friends with most anyone at any moment definitely comes from him, passed on through my mom. And so I carry on the energy and the love that I've been so blessed to be given as a gift in this lifetime. So thank you so much. And in a little bit, I'll talk more about gratitude for parents and grandparents, and gratitude for how to get in touch with the gratitude for the source of your life. That'll be something we cover tonight. But I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate them, and also give each of you a chance to honor and acknowledge the energy that we'd like to bring into this gathering. And I would love for you to share, Mom, who you'd like to bring into this place.
Well, I'm thinking about an event that I participated in with Joanna Macy, where she was invoking the ancestors. She also invoked the generations to come. And so I want to bring into the circles at least 7 generations to come, starting with my children and grandchildren now to live. 7 generations of people around the world who I am grateful for their coming. Because as Joanna Macy said when she was instructing us, she had 2 circles, one the ancestors and one the generations to come. And she had us, I was in the inner circle and the generation to come. She said, and she gave us a question to ask the ancestors, how did you have the courage to do what you did in your lifetime? And the ancestor answered, because I knew you were coming. I knew you were coming.
Yeah.
It's lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And Anna, just before you share, I just want to make sure we turn off our cell phones. Because there may be people who want to join us virtually, but I just want to make sure that they do it quietly.
Right. There we go.
And who would you like to invite into the gathering?
Well, I would never have thought that I would invite somebody in spirit, but if there is a person, it would be the man who was in effect, in reality, the father in my life, although I believe he was not my biological father, although my mother would never admit that. But he has been around in my consciousness a great deal in the past, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. He passed away in 1999. And he's been very much of an inspiration, a source of inspiration to me in a much more conscious way, perhaps in the last couple of years, where I think of him as somebody who is like a figure that inspires me to leap in when I might hesitate. He was a very courageous person, never hesitated to give of himself, and in that sense, a source of inspiration to me. And it's interesting that I feel his energy, I've been feeling it a great deal. And so I invite him. I invite his spirit. His name was Frank in this life.
What is what?
Francis Frank.
Thank you so much for including him.
Yeah, thank you for inviting it, making it possible. He's just been around a lot.
Well, and also for inviting his courage, because that was also, I think, the thing that I experienced with my parents and grandparents was the courage for them to live their lives and build our family and instill in us a kind of love and a core value of caring for life and each other that gave way to the road, the path for me to be focused on gratitude and joy and being able to share that and express that in a big, broad way. So I want to talk about in a moment, in a moment, I'm going to talk about how the gratitude gathering, this concept of people coming together to share in this way, came to be through my life. And I will share a poem to kind of start us off, but I want to give anything else that you may have thought of that you want to share a chance to be spoken.
Well, I think as you were talking about Francis and courageous, I started to think about all the courageous people that I know in my life and know of who are consider themselves global activists, concerned about the well-being of people beyond themselves and contribute enormously with their intelligence and courage and heart I just phone those people that, you know, many of whom I know and many of whom I don't know, who have I'm grateful for their lives in a way that they are able to share the abundance of their life with other people who are less fortunate. And I feel a lot of gratitude for those people.
Well, there's an abundance of love that's kind of present in our midst, and one of the biggest experiences of gratitude I've had in my life is sitting with my father while he was in hospice. And one of the things that a great mentor and spiritual teacher of mine advised me to do was to get a big piece of paper, like one of those really high quality sketch pads, and some really strong pencils, and just let myself write whatever came to me. There was no right thing to write. It was just an opportunity to kind of see what was coming through me. And she just invited me to bring the paper into a space where I could write. I chose to bring it into the space of hospice. I chose to write by my father's bedside because I was inspired by watching him rest and bring closure to his life in quite a peaceful way. And then one day I was in the car driving back from the hospice to my house, and another dear friend of mine, who's also very kind of tapped in and turned on to universal intelligence and getting messages from the universe, said, "It's time for you to write a book." I did not know that this book would turn into a lot of the material that we've worked on in our course together over the last few months. And this poem is the title of my book and also my podcast where I share my poetry. So I want to share this with you and also share that I read this at my father's funeral, and it was my way of expressing the love that I could muster openly and publicly for him. So the poem is called Awakened by Whispering Love. A gratitude poem by Noah Gabriel Press McIntyre. We are awakened by whispering love with him as time turns to the eternal. Gazes of grace, we move into our heart space, connecting and being close in quiet, in silence, with me whispering, "I love you," and him smiling and blinking. Yes. Yes to love. Yes to the peace that starts within. So I'm just going to take a moment and invite us into just one moment of kind of brief meditation before we continue the next part of the conversation. And as you breathe in, just take a moment to notice, are there any messages or words or feelings or vibrations or a sense of energy that you have that is being kind of whispered to you? What are the whisperings in your heart that are most sacred there today? Something to ponder as we breathe in and breathe out together. So we can just open our eyes and stretch our hands, or sometimes your mouth, or kind of almost like we're getting ready for an acting class. You know, nothing to act here, but just a chance to stretch your body and to feel more present in our chairs and our environment that we're in. And I wanted to give a chance actually for you, Mom, to share how the gratitude gatherings came to be in your perspective, and then I'll share from my perspective. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a direct connection to our caring for Jeffrey, and that what became very, very clear as the Parkinson's got worse and he needed more care and stuff like that we learned very quickly, or it was reinforced very quickly in this situation, as happened in other similar situations, that we couldn't do
losing you. I'm sorry, I'm just losing you a little bit. The microphone.
I'm going to move the microphone a little closer. Hold on one second.
I have to talk louder too. I don't have any trouble. We could not care for Jeffrey alone. We needed our community. We needed to call on our friends and family to support us in this journey. And they came through beautifully. And, you know, both Noah and I have spent a lot of our lives connecting, you know, being in relationship with people and building community. So it's not a natural kind of thing to do. In addition to building community, we needed to take care of ourselves, and the community encouraged us to do a level of radical self-care when you're caring for somebody. And for a number of years, we were caring for Jeffrey at home. Well, we just got fatigued as caregivers, and it was not a good situation. And he was ready to move into assisted living, and we found a wonderful place. A wonderful place found us through our connections, through our community. But anyway, so it's through community. And then what I recall is that we were getting together with people. People were supporting us. We'd have meals together. We'd have potlucks at the house. And then it came the time of the presidential election. A lot of people that we knew were very distressed and disheartened by the results of the election, the American election. And so we suggested, look, we're used to we love doing potlucks and having communities come together for lots of reasons. Let's just come together and have some space for people just to say what they're feeling. We're not going to change the election, but we can just say how we're feeling. And it was very powerful. We did it for a couple of times. People just really appreciated being in the same space and being heard and being safe. Just say how devastated they were, how distressed they were, how upset, how scared they were, and how grateful they were. Each person was to be connected to everybody else, and it was the power of the gratitude, the power of being together, and the gratitude expressions really put a whole different light on the election. Just a whole different light on the experience, because we had a chance to work with it and really transform it to something that brought us together and in a loving space with one another.
I'm going to go back to 2013, which is the springtime when my father really started falling, dealing with the different issues around balance, some of which was connected to blood pressure, Parkinson's. You can kind of name whatever diagnosis you may want to, but what was important is we were dealing with a level of uncertainty around his physical abilities, and it was really starting to kick in. And I knew that for me to be the most kind of productive, compassionate, useful person and member of the family, I needed a community of support. So I turned to my community, specifically at Landmark Education, where they have a community of people who've done the Landmark coaching programs for many years. And they have a program called the Wisdom Unlimited course, which consists of a community at the core of it of volunteers who put on social events together. And we were brainstorming what social events we could have in the spring of 2013 that would broaden our community and connection with other people in the greater Boston area. And I said, what if we had a gratitude social? Just a social event, a potluck, where people could come together and share their gratitude. And I knew, both from my experience with bipolar and seeking mental health support about 10 years before, plus exposure to incredible business and personal growth literature when I was 18, that this core of gratitude really does return me to a place of love and serenity and sanity. I experienced it, and peacefulness, and I experienced it in 12-step programs with my father, who we would go to 12-step meetings specifically for food and sugar addiction. But it wasn't so much the program that we were in that was most important. It was really that in the meeting rooms, you heard people talk about their gratitude and what they're grateful for as they said, would return them to a place of sanity in that day that they were practicing sharing their gratitude. So I spoke to a community of people who listened very carefully, this desire to have gratitude gatherings. Now, if you go through 2013, 2014, 2015, there was over a dozen falls in moving my father into assisted living and moving out of the family's house that we'd been in for 20 years and going through the biggest, most challenging transitions of our lives together. And once my father was settled, once my mom was settled, and once I had moved into my apartment with my partner, it was finally time to have the gratitude gathering I had wanted 3.5 years ago. So in October, I said, whatever happens with the election, it'll help to have a gratitude gathering before, during, and after. So the week before, we got a group of people together just to share their gratitude and their relationship with uncertainty. That was kind of the big theme that I can remember. And then at 1 or 2 in the morning on election eve, I went onto Facebook and I did a live video broadcast to ask people what they were most grateful for, regardless of what was happening, as a way to connect. And there was maybe 20 or 30 people that tuned into that Facebook live event where you live stream video. It's become pretty popular now, but at the time it was still kind of newer. And then the next week we had a in-person gratitude gathering here in this space, in this living room. And we proceeded to have one approximately every month. And by the spring of 2017, I hosted my first online gratitude gathering, because part of the vision that I'm sharing this all for and bringing it to tonight, which is what's most important, is the present moment. Our vision for creating online gratitude gatherings to make these sacred, safe spaces, the vision is available to really starting with our friends in multiple time zones, but really to as many loved ones of theirs as they want to include in the process, and have it be kind of a sacred, safe space and circle for people to open their hearts to one another and to learn how to tap into a deeper sense of their own power and courage and wisdom and love for themselves. And so I just want to pause and give either of you a chance to share anything that's kind of popped out at you so far, and then I'll get into how this is also the culmination of our course together.
Well, a couple of things that I've been kind of aware of for a long time, largely because my mother was actually, she was one of those people who always waited for the other shoe to drop. So no matter what, no matter how good it was, at different times, she's actually kind of been one of those people who started with nothing, coming to Australia after World War II, refugee status, blah, blah, blah. And it was an upward curve, right? But there's this consciousness of the other shoe will eventually drop. So just in case it does, like when it does, that sort of thinking, you never can really be in the moment because you're always got this thing behind you. So that was something that didn't really work for me, but I did realize, and I've been understanding that it's so deeply buried that you don't even realize that this is something that's actually become so much a part of your consciousness that you can't allow yourself to really fully be in the moment because the shoe might drop. And I've just been, I think working with you has been kind of the culminating part of that awareness that, I mean, I've been meditating, yoga, read everything that people read. Mentally, it was there. It hadn't gotten into the physical dimension of physical, emotional dimension of being. So, interestingly enough, working with you, I think, has really foregrounded that for me and made me more aware of that moment. Like, I sit on my balcony and a beautiful orange butterfly happens to land on one of the Rose of Sharon bushes at the bottom of the patio below. And all of a sudden, I can actually feel my whole being literally flood with that joy, gratitude, whatever label we want to use for it. And that is so palpable. So that's been happening more and more and more. And being, to me, that is a huge shift because it means that I've moved out of the mind to the body. And one of my key bits of advice that I freely give to people who I'm with all the time, who are immersed in the head, is the body doesn't lie.
That's right.
The mind, the ego does, but the body does not. So if you're still up here, you're not there. And it has been such a switch to, in fact, a very liberating experience to be in that moment of pure joy, gratitude. It is gratitude, gratefulness that this butterfly, wow, is right there for it, not, right? And so you just, it permeates your entire being in a way that is very whole. And that is so strikingly different for me because I've lived a great deal of my life pretty much in the head. And I think feeling for me had become something dangerous because it was more associated with pain for one reason or another. It's not even important to go in that direction. Thing is that I'm not there anymore. And working with you has really foregrounded that for me. It's like brought it all together, which I am extremely grateful for. Because these moments, it doesn't matter how fleeting they are, they're utterly blissful no matter what's going on, no matter what the Trump kingdom is doing, no matter. And I just want to add this if I can. Last night I happened to be, I was reading a collection of poems that some cancer survivors have been working with me on this for years and years and years. So I finally got them to all put together these collections, and I'm just sitting there going through the pile, and I had CNN on in just the visual, and it was actually set in Islamabad. This young woman and her father and her sister and a couple of other people had made this amazing tour through the most mine-ridden, war-ridden areas, had to be escorted at different times by army vehicles, had to pay passage to get through so she could play in the world, it's badminton, it's squash championship.
Squash, yes.
Squash, and she won it.
Yes.
And I was just absorbing all of that and thinking, my God, this man was so like my father. He was very deeply centered. He was completely in his whole being. It was manifested. And it was that actually reminded me so palpably of my own father, the man who certainly was my father in every sense of the word. Somebody who was completely integrated. I think that's the word I want to use. And so no matter what happens outside of you, you're always whole. I think that's the word I want to use. Because wholeness is what gratitude manifests. That you can be grateful means even in just that little moment that you can do that completely wholeheartedly, you are whole. Because I believe we are that. This other fearful, anxious, mind-driven being has been created by the culture around us, by limited perspectives on life. And I understand that. But at the same time, we don't need to stay there. It's a form of self-imprisonment. So that's all I wanted to share.
So as you were talking, I was very moved by what you were saying, and one of the things that Jeffrey was a meditator and he was a spiritual counselor and teacher, among other things. And he stayed around in his body longer than his body was, as you looked at the limitations of his body, his body could have gone. But he was staying around to teach us all to be grateful for the moment. And even when he had stopped speaking, Anna, and he was only speaking with his eyes, he was teaching. And people would come and visit. And he was teaching us all about loving one another, being in the present moment. And it was powerful because people would come and visit who hadn't seen him in a long time and were just blown away by his power. Here he was lying curled up in the bed, a quarter of his, fraction of his adult size, teaching and loving and teaching us all that all we had was this present moment.
Yes.
And then this moment, and we were blessed to have it.
When you can go there, that's living gratitude.
Gratitude.
I think when you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
When we can go to that state of being, then we're living gratitude.
That's right. He was living gratitude. That's a wonder. Thank you. That's a gift. He was living gratitude.
Yes.
Well, how appropriate that, you named this gathering Living Gratitude.
Yes, I did.
That's another piece of inspiration for this gratitude gathering being the first online gratitude gathering where we're sharing some of the material from our joint workshop, if you will, that's in creation, called Living Gratitude. And I actually shared the description that my mom wrote for her new website, enlignment.com, and she put this incredible piece of writing that was really an amazing description of what we had done in the gratitude gatherings up to this point, and where we are in the present, and creating a future for where we're going. And I want to just take a moment to read one of the poems that I feel like connects to some of the energy of what you both were just talking about. And then there's a couple of questions that I just wanted to give us a chance to dive into that are connected to the work in the course that we designed called My Gratitude Myself.
So Noah, in order to be present in my body, I just need to step away for a minute. I'll be right back. Right back, Anna.
All right, Miriam.
So why don't we go off script for a second, Anna? I'll keep the recording going. But in terms of, and this will actually be great for people to see kind of the dynamic of a self-design course in this moment, is I'm about to read the Shining Through poem, which I was actually going to close the gratitude gathering with. But I thought that the Shining Through poem, not just because it's like one of my favorites that we worked on and that I wrote during our time together, but also this poem actually represents, and I guess this is actually turning into an introduction for the poem, this poem that I'm going to share represents a lot of the dynamics of kind of the energy that my father was working with and that a lot of people were interacting with in his final few months, and then how that kind of translated into my body, like how it moved, the energy moved into my physical experience. Because the night that I wrote this poem was a night that I walked up a hill in my new neighborhood, and this hill leads up to the top of a massive country club that overlooks the city of Boston. So it's one of the nicest country clubs in the area, and it just has the most magnificent view of the city and magnificent view of the sunset. And one of the things that I do, a kind of practice, and this is something to think about, feel free to share, is ways that I practice getting into the experience of living gratefully. One of the things I do is listen to gospel music. Another thing is I read and write poetry. I'll listen to guided meditations. I'll write gratitude letters. I'll, write in my gratitude journal. There's a lot of different practices that I personally use. And I'm jumping around a little bit, but I did write a letter to my father. When he was still alive, I wrote him a gratitude letter thanking him for, really thanking him for my life and all the wisdom and love that he had brought into my life. And in that letter, I read the letter to him while he was in his bedroom, kind of around like maybe 8 or 8:30 at night. So he was going to bed earlier these days. And we just sat there in total silence after I read this letter. And then he turns to me, kind of whispering, like we were talking about, and he says, "So what do you call this? What do you call this connection that we have, right? And what do you call this?" And I'm sitting there and I start praying because I was like, "I don't know, Dad." And I said, "This is grace. This is the experience of grace, Dad." And then my partner, Adrian, calls on the phone and we answer, and I say, "Dad, it's Adrian." He says to Adrian, kind of out of the blue, "Do you like dogs?" And Adrian says, "Sure, I like dogs." And then my dad says, you should get a dog. You two should get a dog and name it Grace. And name the dog Grace, and then let your dog out into the yard and let Grace out.
Let Grace out.
Let Grace out. That's really good. Perfect message.
Let Grace out. Out of this conversation, let Grace out.
So speaking of poems, I'm going to read you a poem.
Okay.
And if you could just come a little closer so you're in the view.
Well, that's the interesting thing about messages, that there are people who don't do much with what I call the etheric realm, and who think that if there's a message from some spirit being or the other side or whatever you want to call it, people think it's got to be dressed up in a certain kind of way.
Yes.
That it's got to, sound very formal and da da da. But actually, that is not how it works. That is a human construction, an ego construction about how it ought to work, at least in the ego sense. That because a lot of people elevate the spirit world above the human, forgetting that we're actually all spirits simply manifested in physical form. So ironic, but we've been taught the sort of the secondary, the sense of the human being, the physical being as being somehow secondary, and completely, I think it's a big con trick by people who must have wanted power way back when, hung on to this to have people remain under subjugation. Is when you recognize that we're all these amazing spirits, we're not controllable in the way that you could control the population in the past. So, of course, that top-down view is useful to certain organizations. But we're all coming out of that. I think gradually we're realizing that, as Emmanuel says, it's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you feel. That is power.
Yes.
How you feel. You have complete control over how you feel and how you are in any given moment.
And once you recognize those feelings.
I'm sorry, what?
What you choose to do with those feelings.
Yes. Well, when you acknowledge that you're having these feelings, it's kind of interesting, I think, then that you get it, that you can choose to feel sad, you can choose to feel happy, you can choose to feel powerful, you can choose to be not powerful. That is always within your these are options that we all have.
Anna, have you read the book called The Book of Joy? It's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and the Desmond Tutu.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Because their conversation about, joy, the joy, expressions of joy during the transition from Tibet to India in the terrible journey that the Dalai Lama took, and the Desmond Tutu's experiences with apartheid. That even within these horrifying experiences, they were able to find joy, and that was very moving.
Yes.
There's a great chapter which I'll be referencing in my further work with you, Anna, and in my further work around gratitude together, which is from that book. The Book of Joy has an incredible chapter on gratitude.
Yes.
And it does a really great job at weaving together a lot of the thought leadership happening about gratitude right now. And in the spirit of kind of what kind of got me gravitated towards that text and being introduced to that text through my mom during the time of our study together. I do want to take a moment to mention the focus of our study so that, for us, but also for those of us who are watching this after the recording, they really get the kind of bigger picture of what this gathering is showing up as a culmination of. And there was a certain point where I realized just how exhausted I was of taking care of my father, dealing with the grief of his loss, taking care of my mom, taking care of the family, doing all these things that would kind of be represented as caretaker fatigue. And we were in a wonderful grief support group. And that's when I met you, Anna. And that's when I realized that I could actually design a course of study where I could return to my gratitude for myself, but not just return to it, actually kind of discover it newly and discover myself in a fresh way in the midst of a lot of, a mix of healthy and unhealthy stress. And I know that every day each of us deals with a mix of healthy and unhealthy stress. Things come at us and we choose how we feel, and sometimes we lose control. And we need tools to gain control over when depression or anxiety or mania or extremely difficult relationships or misdirected, misguided communication. How do we kind of bring things back in order when things go out of order? And so I knew that gratitude practices I've been studying for the last few years helped my clients. I didn't know how much they would help me. And in working with you, in realizing that writing poetry would be a way of working through and expressing and embodying the feelings of connection and love that come from the grief, but also dealing with my own depression and anxiety and fears and all the energy of fear that can be transmuted into love is the most powerful practice that I learned from my father's Buddhist practice. It's the most powerful practice we were brought to when we studied Buddhism together as a family. The Chode practices from the Tibetan traditions, the incredible gospel music from South Africa, all of these different streams of wisdom and traditions and ancient traditions and new thinking fused together has formed my synthesis of my gratitude practices to this point. And the reason I wanted to do this course and this gratitude gathering is to kind of keep a very simple message, which is my most powerful moments. And I'll only speak for myself, but it is an invitation for each of us to look. My most powerful moments is when I realize that I'm as grateful for myself as the people who love me are grateful for me. And when I realize that I can look myself in the mirror and love myself not just as much as my loved ones or my parents or my partner or my friends, but love myself in a way that honors my connection with myself as a connection to the source of life, as my connecting to the source energy that gives us life is a direct connection. And the gratitude practices are a way of tapping into my own spiritual independence, which creates a whole new form of energy to be interdependent and connect with other people. There's all sorts of literature, social science research. The work of Professor Robert Emmons is quoted a lot. The work of Brother David Steintel-Rost is quoted a lot, both in that book of joy that we were talking about. There's all this literature from my health coaching school, from spiritual and business books. But you know what? It doesn't really matter unless you integrate it into your relationship with yourself.
I totally agree. This has been the walk that I've been on. If you don't integrate it yourself, it remains an interesting set of concepts. It is not until you instantiate it, you haven't really arrived at that.
No, Anna, it's in all the work I've done as a therapist and a coach and a consultant, and it's like the work that's most important is really helping people get into practice of self-love.
Mm. Well, yes, and there's been so much, well, you could say across time, certainly in the traditions that I've been most familiar with, self-love is the one that has been the most neglected.
Yes.
And for what I think are really quite spurious reasons, and we're finally waking up to that.
Yeah. You had a poem you wanted to read.
I'd like to share this poem because this is a poem that is truly an example of working with all the grief and all the energy and all the experience of love and fear, loss, longing, belonging, feeling lonely, disconnected, all of that mix of energy and emotions, I feel like kind of all came through me all together into this poem. And in our course of study, I never had realized before that my writing poetry was one of the strongest, best, most life-changing, inspiring, like self-inspiration. When I write my poetry, I am actually genuinely inspired by myself. And I don't necessarily think all my poetry is good or bad. I'm taking this out of the judgmental realm of good, bad, right, wrong.
Yeah.
There are certain poems that we've talked about that come through me as a practice of expressing my gratitude and expressing lots of things, where the poem inspires me after it's come through. And it is a work of art that I cannot control, and it comes through me. And we've talked about that experience of embodiment of poetry and how poetry alters when it comes from the page into the spoken and the shared language. So I want to exemplify a lot of things we've talked about in the course by sharing this poem with you called Shining Through.
Let me just say something before you say it. When you may I say something? I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge the power of your gratitude practices and what kind of impact that has had certainly for me and other people around you. And it invites people, as you've done the work for yourself, you're inviting me and a lot of other people to be grateful for their ability, whether it's doing poetry or painting or speaking or something like that. It may not be the same form of expression, but you're the gratitude guy. And it's like, I remember having a dinner many moons ago with Charlie. I remember Charlie's last name.
Do you want to tell Anna who Charlie is?
Yeah, Charlie.
Just so she knows who you're talking about.
Charlie is a man who is a coach and consultant and taught a course on. He was a coach and consultant and started a number of different organizations around here that were very important. And he came over one night and he said, I've been thinking about what it is that each of us can't not do or can't not be. And he turned to Noah and he said, you can't not be grateful. Or you cannot not be expressing gratitude. And Noah's being has been like that for his whole life, really. And I think that your poems are inspirational and your being is inspirational. And it inspires me and other people to find our own expression. And so with that, you can do
That's exciting. I also want to make a plug for water. and rest as two of the things I'm most grateful
Yes.
for. I actually intentionally went and got a drink of what I call my gratitude juice, and it's just a mix of tea and vitamins and herbs and juice that really helps me stay focused and present and grounded. And I also, I think to my favorite performer, who's also a poet and a musician, India Ari has this song on her newest album called Give Thanks. And if you haven't heard it,
it's wonderful.
Go to YouTube or iTunes or Google Play and just type in, or Siri, and just type in Give Thanks by India Ari. It's India and then Arie. And we can actually play that song to close out our gathering. But let me share the poem. Let me share the poem, and then I can share the song. So this poem I'm going to read, but I also want to let you know it's on my podcast, which is anchor.fm/awakened/whispering love. So that's a podcast service. And the reason I'm making a kind of plug for my podcast is because it's where I'm continuing to share my poetry. But they have a recording function, not to get too technical before I share this poem. They have a recording function where I was able to record this poem to a beat and a rhythm, which is wonderful. So if you're watching this, I want to share this poem with you here live, but also have you go listen to the poem on the podcast.
I've got written that down.
So here's the poem. Shining Through by Noah Gabriel Press McIntyre. On the verge of shedding the tears, the weight, the lifting of the lightness and the burdens of a heart. Yes, my heart, full of love, full of grace, full of wheels spinning in a race to connect, and not sure why, and not sure to what. So we cry together. Yes, together we can. And we cry, bewildered by our grief, by the gift of intense life and a life well lived, and love and grace. And there are the precious moments to listen and dance to the beat of his grace and his face pulling me through. There's no one right way to do this. And staying sane, yes, staying sane is now more of an accomplishment than ever before. We cherish you, your smile, your face. Yes, your smile and your face and your faith and the twinkle that you reunite with. Yes, you in the mirror. And the gift of her love, the passion of a family finding ways to care in the faith of a confused love turns into new clarity of relief and release and expression. And we speak on, we share to the beat of faith and grace in his name, in her name, in the joy of our faith as we cherish peace. Peace found in the touch of our feet to the earth. We hold our home close and we trust, yes, we trust in our evolution and our goals and our clarity and our heart, our compassion for our beloved community. And we say thank you. Thank you for being part of my community. I sing my love for you. To your love beyond the silent reflection in the gift of this moment, my love for you shall always, always shine through.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like an Indiari.
Now my mom's gonna play it.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yes,
my mom's gonna play the song about giving
Siri,
thanks.
Play Giving Thanks by Indiari. Can you hear?
Give thanks for all that is. Give praise, give praise, give praise, give praise, give praise for all that is. There will never ever be another day just like this day, so let's give praise now. Say loud, say loud, say loud, say loud for all that it is.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anna. It's a treasure to meet you finally.
Thank you, Miriam. And it's a pleasure to meet you too. Thank you. I've heard a lot about you from him. Thank you, Noah.
As a way of closing, we like to dedicate the merit of our time together, which is a Buddhist practice. And then one way to dedicate the merit is a special Buddhist prayer. It's very simple, very simple. It's actually on the back of my father's picture card. I'm going to grab it.
Oh, yeah.
This is Jeffrey hiking in the mountains many years ago.
Wow.
And I'm going to share the prayer on the back of the card.
Okay.
It's the Buddhist version of the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And here's the dedication. By this merit, may all sentient beings experience the cessation of suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings experience happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Amen.
A woman, a woman.
So I'm going to stop the recording right now.
All righty.